Hi everybody, welcome to my channel, Life Law Bim. Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. It's lovely to see you here again. I'm happy to say that we have Emma Fielding joining us today, and she's a probationary tenant at the 36 group and is also a member of the 36 crime team. Now, you know we like to get in our fun facts when we can. Emma is, well, she plays underwater hockey, so you have a bit of homework there to go and Google what exactly that is, but it does sound quite entertaining. Emma, thank you very much for joining us today.
No problem, Nia. Happy to be here.
Wonderful. And we are going to be talking about an exciting topic, an incoming pupil barrister's guide to pupillage. This will be helpful for persons like myself who are getting ready to start pupillage. We always do like some advice. So before we delve into the substantive matter today, what we'd like to know is a bit about Emma's background. So could you kindly tell us or outline your journey into law?
Sure. So my first degree was in languages. So I studied French and German. And then I went into recruitment and headhunting after university. About kind of 5 or 6 years into that career, I started studying the law part-time. So I did the conversion course part-time. And basically sort of it just snowballed from there. So I really caught the law bug. And in particular, I enjoyed when I tried mooting, for example, I really enjoyed that. I thought, this is something that suits my skill set quite well. So that's how I started to think that maybe the bar would be the right route for me rather than a solicitor. Started doing many pupillages. I then got a job as a paralegal in a criminal defense firm. So got introduced to lots of barristers that way and got some insight into, that world. And then I did the bar course with the University of Law, again, part-time, so over 2 years. And over both those years, I made pupillage applications. I wasn't successful in the first round of applications, but I was in my second year, which also coincided with COVID hitting. So that made everything a little bit strange. So lots of processes got put on hold. But luckily, I did manage to get an offer of pupillage from Foundry Chambers, which I have just recently completed. So I finished my pupillage year at the end of September. And then I've recently moved to 36 crime as a probationary tenant with them.
Wonderful. What a whirlwind of a journey, especially coming from a non-legal background directly into the law. That must have been fun as well, learning the skills of a headhunter and recruitment. I'm sure that you gained some transferable skills before coming into the law there.
Yeah, definitely. I think it was a lot about communication, of course, and also the kind of persuasive skills, because you're speaking to people, you're trying to get them, excited about the role, especially headhunting, where it's quite targeted. So it's very much a selling job. It's also quite commercial, which is obviously helpful now that I'm self-employed. It's useful to kind of have an idea of that commercial sense and targets and figures and things. So it definitely had a lot of transferable skills. Yes.
Wonderful. Now, I'm sure, like many, you would have encountered some types of hurdles on your journey to the bar. Now, if you did encounter those, could you outline those hurdles for us to share that with us? We'd be very interested to know how you handle those.
Sure. Well, I think the biggest thing for me was, I suppose, coming to the law a little bit later in life, and being in a different position to many other students who have kind of done that journey, perhaps straight from university or with maybe a short gap between university and doing the bar course and then starting pupillage. So I was at quite a different point in my life compared to others. I'd already started working, obviously earning money. When I started the bar course, I had recently bought my flat. So I started obviously having mortgage payments and things like that. I think for me, it was, it was quite a big sacrifice to kind of move away from where I was financially doing quite well to, I took quite a pay cut in order to do the paralegal job. And that kind of coincided with the time that I just started kind of having the mortgage payments and obviously bills and etc. that everyone has to pay. So I wasn't in the same position as some in terms of I had to work essentially while I was studying. And I think that was obviously quite a big challenge because throughout 4 years, I was working full time and studying part time. If I had kind of annual leave from work, I would often have to use that to either revise for exams or do mini pupillages or other sort of volunteering experiences. So it was quite tough to not actually have any breaks and to quite a few sacrifices that I had to make to kind of make that work. But ultimately, I did manage to make it work. Obviously, I'm here now and I'm where I want to be. So the sacrifices that I made were definitely worth it. But there were definitely times when it was tough to try and combine work, study, and pupillage and everything sort of combined. Sometimes in quite a stressful way, I think, to try and make that all work together.
Yeah, I definitely could understand that. As we do know that a good set of the student population has to manage working and studying, which in and of itself is a feat. But I couldn't help but hear you mention bills and mortgage payments, etc. And it prompted me to wonder how you were doing throughout that period when the criminal bar was on strike. Especially I'm sure when you were choosing crime, you would have known that crime may not be as lucrative as other areas. So it prompts me to wonder and to ask you why you chose as well to undertake criminal pupillage and how the strikes at the bar really impacted your pocket, if it did at all, given that you had a pupillage award.
Yes, so I did have the pupillage award, and when the strike action was going on, I had guaranteed earnings, which meant that I at least had like a minimum amount of money coming in, and I would often exceed the guaranteed earnings. So for me, it wasn't so much of an issue because at that time I was in the magistrates court a lot. Rather than the Crown Court, and the strike only affects the Crown Court work, defence work. So I was able to kind of work around that, but it impacted me less so financially and more in terms of the kind of exposure I was getting to Crown Court work, for example, which I would have probably got more of had the strike not been happening. It's definitely been, it's tough choosing the criminal bar. In terms of financially speaking, and of course, it when you compare it to, when I compare my experience financially to, pupils who have done a commercial or civil or family pupillage, for example, it's a very different situation, not just in terms of money, but also in terms of their work-life balance and being able to, not have to work every evening, not have to work lots of weekends. I think the criminal bar is very much a labour of love, but it's the only area that ever really interested me in terms of where I want to focus my practice on. I think I haven't yet done a jury trial, but I'm hoping I will do one over the next few months. But I think there's nothing like that experience of standing up in a Crown Court. In a Crown Court and addressing a jury and kind of looking at the criminal cases. So I think for me, it's I'm doing it trying to make as much of a living as I can out of it, but knowing that ultimately, unfortunately, I'm never going to be as well remunerated as my colleagues in the commercial bar or the civil bar, for example.
Now, beside your love for advocacy and jury advocacy, do you think there's anything else that really inspired you to join the criminal bar?
And I think it sounds like a cliche, but it's working with people, and I think ordinary people as well, the kind of people that, you know, anyone can get caught up in the criminal justice system, whether that's obviously defendants accused of a crime, who might be you know, facing custody, or you know, kind of life-altering situations, whether it's you know, complainants or victims, potential victims of crime. And I think you know, it felt like it's something where you are really making a difference to people's lives, to ordinary people's lives, and it is important that, you know, we have a working and functioning and fair criminal justice system. And I hope that in the work that I do and will do, you know, I will contribute to that. And I think that's, you know, obviously you can do great and interesting work in other areas of law, of course, but I think criminal law in particular is very much people focused and dealing with people at what might be the most difficult time in their lives, really.
Now, Emma, I think it's very appropriate for us to talk to you about, you know, some real top tips for you to provide guidance for incoming pupil barristers. What do you think incoming pupil barristers should be doing prior to commencing pupillage?
That's a good question. I mean, I think it depends, of course, how close, how much of a gap there is between starting pupillage and completing the bar course. I think if you've got a bit of a gap, it's probably helpful to kind of have a look over your kind of notes and your, you know, what you would have revised from for the core areas, and kind of refreshing yourself on your particular area of law that you're going into. I think other than that, you might want to do some reading. I mean, there's some great books on advocacy, for example. You know, you might want to, you know, if you're going into crime, read Secret Barrister's book, or, you know, something that's just going to give you a bit of a flavour of what's to come, and kind of hopefully get you a bit excited about it. You might want to maybe do some, you know, work experience with solicitors, for example. I mean, if you had a year gap, I mean, I did paralegal roles, and that's what I did in the gap between starting pupillage. I think in the kind of few months before you start, I think it's really important to have a break, and whether that's to go on holiday if you're able to do that, or whether it's just to, you know, even if it's just a few weeks, just to do something relaxing, you know, nothing related to the law, because it is a very intense year. And I think it's important to try to have a break, and kind of, you know, shore up your reserves for the year to come.
We know this may vary from chambers to chambers, but there's still some pupils wondering when they should expect to sign their contracts. Do you think you could shed any light on that?
The contract. I think I was sent the contract kind of in the month or so before I started, and I think I would have signed it around the time that I started. I think it really does depend, like you said, about the chambers. I think you have to bear in mind that chambers, they're not an organization that's set up, you know, with an HR department and with payroll and with onboarding teams that you have in, you know, in for example, solicitors firms or big law firms. So it does tend to be, you know, a little bit more relaxed than that. And sometimes you might need to kind of prompt a little bit. And, you know, everyone's always very busy. So I think it definitely varies. And I wouldn't be concerned if it was a little bit more last minute than you might have been expecting. I think that's probably quite normal. But I think try to find out, like, there will be someone who will be a contact person, whether that's the head of pupillage or like someone who's maybe like an more of an administrative or finance role. There'll probably be a good kind of touch point for when you're likely to kind of get contracts and things like that.
I think taxes that's the word that kind of bounces around in a lot of our minds, especially persons who maybe didn't have much experience in a self-employed role before. And I think taxes definitely is that terminology that people start to wonder about before embarking on pupillage. Do you think pupil barristers or incoming pupil barristers should begin thinking about the payment of taxes prior to starting pupillage?
I mean, it's not a bad idea, I think, to just kind of have a bit of an overview. I mean, I did some freelance work before I started pupillage, so I already did kind of have an idea about taxes. I think in your pupillage year, because you either have an award or guaranteed earnings, your tax kind of burden in that first year isn't likely to be particularly high. I think at the point when you're moving from being a pupil barrister to being either a tenant or probationary tenant, that's the point where you really need to be on top of what you need to put aside for tax. I think it's just getting into a different mindset when you're employed. You're obviously the tax is taken at source, so you don't have to think about it at all. You just see the money that's the net that you get each month, and it's a fixed amount, and this is the amount that I have. The thing with paying tax is that obviously up front you're getting all the money in, and you're the one that has to be disciplined and think, actually, this money isn't mine, not all of it anyway. I need to put some aside for tax. I need to put some aside for VAT. So I think it's getting into that mindset of, not all of this money is mine, and I need to be disciplined about putting some aside for tax. I mean, for example, I have a separate bank account where I put the tax money, so it's not like kind of accessible to me, so I can't be like, oh, I want to go on holiday, I'm going to spend this money, and it's just in a separate place. So it's whatever works for you, really. But I think you do need to start thinking about systems, and I suppose getting into that mindset of being self-employed.
Now that we're talking about systems, I really think that you offered a very valuable point there in terms of putting the tax into a separate bank account, because I think some people actually do remember they have to pay it, but when it's within your normal spending account, it's very easy to lose track and just swipe that debit card and then realize, oh dear, I'm in a pickle when it's time to claim your taxes. Now you've just given us that one key accounting tip. Do you think there are any other methods which persons should employ in order to kind of start to get to grips with the accounting side of our practice?
Well, I might be preempting, I think, one of your other questions, but I think getting an accountant is really valuable for that. You will find that there are accountants that are specific to the bar, and look after barristers essentially. And often they will do kind of a deal where they will do your first kind of pupillage year either for free or for a reduced rate. And that's really helpful because they can obviously give you advice on what to do in terms of taxes. They can fill out your tax return for you, and they can also advise you, what percentage of your earnings do you need to be setting aside. Is the award taxable, which I think generally it isn't taxable, but if there's any kind of question marks about that, obviously you can ask them. And then you have that reassurance of, what you don't want to do with things like taxes is you don't want to make any assumptions about whether you should or should not pay tax on something, because that can be quite an expensive mistake to make if you think, oh, it's fine because, I know that I don't have to pay tax on this, but you haven't actually checked. And then it might turn out that in fact you do. So I think it's really helpful to have an accountant. It is affordable, especially, like I said, some of the deals that they do. Obviously, if you're a very thrifty person, you might, it's certainly it's not so complicated that you would have to have an accountant. Personally, I prefer to have that security of having someone who, well, I can talk to and speak about it.
Very helpful indeed. Now, what are some of the practicalities that must be organized prior to commencing pupillage?
Practicality as well. If you're in crime, then you want your wig and gown, which is expensive but necessary. You want a good laptop, kind of good tech, I would say, set up, because obviously you're going to be working a huge amount off of your laptop, just the nature of the job, whether you're in court all the time or whether you're in chambers or in conferences. So I would say invest in a decent laptop. Also, like, have your kind of home office set up. I think some people might choose to go into chambers to work, but I think more and more people are choosing to work from home. And I have a second screen, obviously, your desk, your mouse, whatever it is that you need to work. I think second screens are probably going to be invaluable, because whether you're crime or another area, you're often going to need to be, looking at information and drafting things at the same time. And so things like that, I think, are helpful. Whatever texts you need, it might be worth just waiting until you start sometimes, because it might be that chambers have deals with for the white book, for example, or Blackstones, or my supervisor very kindly gave me his old one of his copies of Archbold, which was very nice of him. And so it may be that there are certain things that you can kind of pick up from other people. I invested in, for example, a magistrates court kind of handbook before I started on my feet. So books is one, tech is another, and I think, what else can you do to prepare? I think those are the main things, really.
We are aware of the pupil advocacy course. Now, I think everyone may be thinking about that and the workload. So how did you go about balancing your workload from pupillage with the pupil advocacy course?
I think the main thing is to speak to your supervisor about it. It's one of your supervisor's roles. They have to make sure that you have enough prep time and you can complete the pupil advocacy course in good time. So that should take priority over work that they set you, for example. I think, communicate with your supervisor, let them know the timetable of what you have when. I know different courses have different structures. I did mine through Gray's Inn, and it was kind of a number of evenings, and then I think it was one or two weekends. Others have 2-week periods, for example. So let your supervisor know about your timetable. And if you need the prep time, I at one point I said to my supervisor, I really need a half day to just kind of focus on this. So, when we had a kind of quieter moment in our trial, he said, take your half day, go and do the preparation you need to do. So that would be my kind of big tip for managing that.
Given that we're talking about tips, do you have any other helpful tips that will assist a pupil to be successful on that course?
I think there's you always feel very much like you're being observed all the time, and you kind of feel that pressure. I think my tip would be to relax and to know that you're there for a reason, and to try to be yourself as much as you can, because I think that chambers want to see who you really are. They want to see your personality. They don't want to see this version of yourself that's scared to do anything or to speak up and things. I think obviously asking, you want to be asking lots of questions. You want to be kind of enthusiastic and keen, and I think having a good relationship with your supervisor, of course, and and trying to think of other tips. I think it's definitely a marathon, not a sprint, in terms of pupillage. And I think that you've got to kind of take that long view, and don't work yourself to death during pupillage. I think try to have that work-life balance. And if you need to, speak to chambers or speak to your supervisor, that there should be someone that's kind of looking out for your sort of well-being and mental health and things like that in chambers. So if you feel like things are getting on top of you, or you need some time off, then don't be afraid to ask for that, because it's important that I think chambers supports their pupils, and that they feel that they can ask for things. If for some reason something happened that meant you needed some time off, they can always extend pupillage by a month. There's a lot more flexibility, I think, than people think. It's just about having that kind of open line of communication with chambers throughout, really, so you feel comfortable to bring things up.
It definitely sounds then that you must have a good relationship with your supervisor. You should try to develop a good relationship, and develop open lines of communication. Makes me wonder as well too, how did you ensure that you improved upon any feedback received? Because obviously we know that's a learning curve. That year is about learning. So how did you ensure that you improved upon any feedback?
I think what I would do is I would write down the feedback, and I think that's important because you often get a lot of information kind of throughout your pupillage, of course. And I would keep a document where if my supervisor gave me some advice or some tips, I'd write it down. Or if I had a piece of work that would come back to me, I'd kind of write a note of what the feedback was, what things I should look out for in the future. So then the next time that you do a piece of work, then you can kind of refer to that document and think, am I doing this? Am I, let's say your feedback was being more concise, then you'd kind of have another look at what you'd done and think, do I need all these words? Can I cut this down? So you're ensuring that you're trying to take that feedback on board. So I think that's helpful. I think again, asking follow-up questions if there's a piece of feedback that you're not quite sure what they mean, or it would help for them to give an example, then don't be afraid to say, I didn't really quite understand what you meant when you said this, can you explain that a little bit more? Because that then helps you, of course, to be able to improve for next time.
How can pupils ensure that they're an effective pupil barrister? Because everyone wants to, I guess, impress and ensure that they're doing a very good job. So how do you think they can ensure that they're being effective?
I think during pupillage, in your first 6, you're a little bit like a sponge, really, and you're just kind of absorbing everything. So I think in your first 6, I think it's important to just be really to listen to even when you think that you're not going to learn anything, like you're having lunch in the robing room or something. I mean, I've learned a lot from just listening to other people's conversations around me in court, or in robing rooms and things like that. So there's, or for example, just being in chambers and just listening to people's conversations, or learning from others. So I think it's being an effective pupil is a lot about kind of absorbing all of that information, not necessarily kind of you doing a lot of the talking, I suppose. I think sometimes the most effective thing a pupil can do is just kind of listen, and whether that's taking a note of something, or I think it's a difficult balance. I mean, sometimes of course you would you'd be asked for your opinion on something, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't speak out, or you shouldn't have an opinion or a view on something, but I think there's a time and a place for that. And I think sometimes the most effective thing you can do is just listen, and then if you have like a question or a thought afterwards, you can say, oh, you know what, when the client said this, I was thinking about that, what do you think? Which is a better way of, I think, dealing with it than kind of jumping in a conference and saying, oh, what about this? Which you might end up kind of doing something and inadvertently, not the best thing. I think, taking lots of notes, just taking a note of everything that you're doing is always really helpful. I think, just look for ways that you can be helpful for your supervisor. You can make suggestions as well. Like I, for example, said, oh, I'd really like to try out a closing speech. Can I write one for this case? And then, you can look at it. So, if there's things that you want to do, that's good too. You can make suggestions of things that you can do. It's definitely like a two-way street, I would say. So yeah, take the initiative, I think, is important. Listen and absorb a lot, and know when to stay quiet, I would say.
Definitely very insightful advice. Well, we've spoken a lot about developing a relationship with your supervisor. Now, I'm sure that it must be very important to develop a relationship with your clerk as well. So I'm eager to talk to you a bit about, developing that kind of relationship with your clerk. In that vein, what kind of relationship should you develop with your clerk? How often do you think you should be communicating with your clerk as well?
So yeah, it's definitely a very important relationship. And I think in first six, very little, to be honest, because essentially you're where your supervisor is, or your supervisor should really be the one to arrange where else you might be. So I think in first six, it's more you observing your supervisor's relationship with the clerks. So you can get some kind of tips from them on what their relationship is like, and although bearing in mind, obviously, they'll be much more senior than you are. So it might be that, they have a more casual relationship than you might have at the start. So yes, in first six, I think not too much. I mean, you kind of know that they're there, but you don't particularly have that kind of close relationship. In second six, obviously, that changes. So, you obviously that you're going to be kind of starting to get your instructions through your clerks. I think I can only really speak for crime, where there were lots of last minute things. Obviously quite a lot of travel involved. So then obviously it becomes, having that kind of open line of communication becomes quite important. Sorry, I've lost track slightly of what the question was to start with. I've just kind of talked about the difference between first and second six, but what was your initial question?
I think you answered it quite well, actually. We were speaking about the relationship that we should start to develop with the clerk, and you helpfully summarized that. Basically, in first six, you want to be observing how your supervisor interacts with the clerk. And then obviously in your second six, then you really start your communication. So I think you've also helpfully allowed us to gain insight into that difference, the distinction between the relationship you have with the clerk in the first and the second. And how do you, I think this is one where persons want to be able to communicate well, but still not in an offensive manner. So to be very diplomatic. So how do you navigate experimenting with various types of work, and then obviously relaying your likes or dislikes to your clerk and your supervisor, particularly in second six when you're on your feet?
Well, I think at the beginning, you're probably going to be likely to be fairly open, because you haven't had experience yet of doing different things. So I think in general, you're likely to be quite open in the start of your second six to kind of try out different things. What do you like? What do you not like? Obviously, it's a balancing act between the needs of chambers and the clerks, and of course, as a pupil, you are kind of the lowest down on the list of priorities in terms of, I mean, you're very valuable as a pupil because you kind of fill those gaps. When a colleague has a trial overrunning, for example, you might be the one that's able to step in and cover something for them. Or you might be the one that's able to do that case that the solicitors are desperate for someone to have and will be really grateful if you can find someone last minute. So you do tend to be sort of, kind of thrown in on different things quite last minute. I think if you have a particular, if you think, oh, I really don't like, after kind of a few months of trying different things, if there are some things that you prefer or like less, then absolutely, say that to the clerks. I think face-to-face contact is quite good. So if they are physically in chambers, it's obviously good to go. And I mean, you can kind of you don't have to necessarily say, I don't want to do that work anymore. But you can, you can go into the clerk's room, for example, and say, oh, I did that, that case early in the week, it was quite tough because of X, Y, and Z, and the solicitors were a bit difficult or whatever. Or you can, say, oh, I thought that case that, when you did X case, it was really interesting and I'd like to do more of that. Or, do you ever have these kind of cases, because I'm really interested in that. So I think you can approach it with them, in that kind of conversational way, and they should hopefully kind of listen to that, even if you don't think it's, you necessarily telling them directly what you want. I think if you're having those conversations, and then they will listen, and you might be able to steer things in a certain direction.
Thank you very much for that. Now, what are some of the myths around pupillage? Do you think that when you went into pupillage, you realized, okay, there are some myths and these need to be debunked? If they are, could you kindly share?
I think one myth is that it's a 12-month interview. And you hear that a lot, and I don't think it is, because it can't possibly be a 12-month interview, because that is incredibly stressful. And also, like, the chambers and your supervisor don't want to be interviewing you for 12 months. They don't want every interaction with you to be a test, or to be judging you at all times. I mean, of course, they're going to form an overall impression of you, and that's from a variety of things, whether that's you with your supervisor in your first 6, just general, being in court, how you are with, clients, how you are, interacting with the clerks, your communication, what kind of feedback you get, an advocacy training that you do. So it's coming from a whole host of sources, but at the same time, you don't have to be on your guard, every single moment of pupillage. And it's okay to relax, and people make mistakes, or you might be a bit tired and grumpy one day, and that's okay. It's okay to be human and to be yourself, and chambers aren't going to judge you for that. So I think that's probably quite a big myth. I think the other one is that, I think I touched on this earlier, but that there's not any flexibility in pupillage. There is flexibility, because your chambers can offer obviously a wide range of work. There's a wide range of people. If, for example, you're just really not getting on with your supervisor, you can change your supervisor. If there's some kind of clash of personalities, or you're just not really feeling it, you can say to chambers, like, X is great, but could we maybe change that? And they can do that. There's no issue why they can't. Or if, like I said, for whatever reason, you might be kind of coming to the end of your 12 months, and you might think, what, I'm not actually ready to apply for tenancy yet, because I haven't had experience in this, or I had a bit of time off because of that. So extend the pupillage. It's not, they can extend it by a month, 2 months. Some chambers do 18 months pupillages. So there is more flexibility than I think people think going in. It's not very structured and very rigid. And I think it's just about asking those questions, and saying, what can we do, making suggestions, and kind of having that dialogue with chambers, I think, is important.
Well, Emma, that's definitely a big myth that you've just helped to debunk, because I actually thought it was a lot more structured and rigid and very hard to kind of depart from what you should be doing by when, etc. So that's very helpful to know. Now we're into our top tips segment. So we're going to ask you for some top tips in doing well in the first 6 first.
Top tips. So top tip would be, take a note of everything. You will think that you'll remember things, because at the time they seem memorable to you, but you won't remember things. And I mean, just to give you an example, in crime, you have these different grades for prosecutors. So when you're prosecuting, you have grade 1, grade 2, and it goes up to grade 4. And when you're applying for those grades, you need to give kind of examples of, obviously things that you've done, and, witness handling, and etc. Different areas of examples. And for that kind of thing, when you come to filling that out, it's incredibly difficult to remember exactly things that you've done, whether that's observing in first six or things that you've done yourself in second six. I think taking a note of everything, all the kind of learnings that you're getting, even if it's just small things like, where to sit in court or how to calculate something, just take a note of everything. That would be my top tip number one for first six. And what would be my other tip? I'd just say, be yourself, show your personality. I like to bake, so I would sometimes, bake cookies and bring them into the robing room and be very popular with everyone. So, that was me, and I might have second guessed myself and thought, oh, it might not be appropriate to, do that, but it's what I like to do, and I like to share baking with people, and, it went down quite well. So, if you have a funny sense of humor, or, there's something that you do that's a bit different, or a hobby or something, just it's fine to be yourself and have your own style. I think the third tip I would say is, I think in first six it's quite strange because your supervisor is obviously much more senior than you will be. So it can be a bit intimidating sometimes, because obviously they very much know what they're doing. They're very comfortable with different situations, and you think, I would never know what to do in that situation when it's me. But I think you just need to keep in mind that you're not going to start off with the big, murder trial. You're going to be starting off with, the little theft in the magistrate's court or something like that. So it's about kind of taking what learnings you can, but also knowing you're going to be your own person, you're going to have your own style, and it's okay for your style to be different to your supervisors, for example. Obviously you want to learn from them, but they're much more senior and experienced than you, and they're also different to you, and there's more than one way to approach something. So
wonderful tips, Emma. Ultimately, let's wrap up this interview with the top tips for doing well in the second six.
Second six, it's such a whirlwind. So what are my top tips for second six? Again, this is probably more applicable to crime than other areas. But my top tip for crime would be, don't prepare things in advance, too far in advance, because things change around a lot in terms of diaries, and you don't want to waste time preparing for something that's going to kind of come out of your diary last minute and something new is going to be put in. So I would never prepare anything earlier than the day before, and potentially even the afternoon, kind of evening before. So that would be one tip, at least for crime, to avoid kind of wasting your time. I think being as efficient as you can, because there's that you'll get a lot of reading, obviously a lot of preparation, a lot of deadlines and things, and I think it's just about working out what is the best use of your time. Ideally you don't want to be kind of doing all-nighters or working like crazy for something that's, if there are shortcuts or things that you can do to kind of save you some time. For example, if you're covering for someone else's case, there might be lots of things that would take you a while to kind of get up to speed with, or you don't know where to go for the information. Well, speak to that person whose case it is and have a 5-minute conversation with them, and they'll probably tell you everything that you need to know in about 10 minutes, and it would have taken you hours to figure that out by yourself. So think of shortcuts and who you can speak to, and where you can get the information that you need to be as efficient as possible. And my final tip, and maybe the most important, is to have like a group of kind of people around you that can support you in different ways. So whether that's a WhatsApp group or something with other juniors in chambers, or other pupils that people that you can just ask those kind of silly questions to, or can share experiences, or you're panicking about this, what do you do? And, people that will just kind of listen, and you can vent, and you can, you can tell them the stories of what's happened that day. Or, it's a difficult 6 months, in particular in crime. I think it can be very full on. So you need to have kind of people that you can, vent to. And I think that's really important.
Oh, Emma, wonderful. There's one question that just crept into my mind, and I just said to myself, I always have this thing that nothing is a silly question, and there may actually be some viewer that may be wondering. Obviously, we're being super positive here, but do you think there is a possibility that someone may pass or fail pupillage? And what would be the kind of ramifications with that?
Well, you don't really hear about people failing
Which
pupillage,
is
I would
great.
say.
Which is great.
I mean, sometimes, you might get to the end of the 12 months, and it may be that chambers don't feel like they yet can make a decision on tenancy, for example. If that happens, or if you don't, you don't feel like the chambers where you did pupillage is the best fit for tenancy, that's not the end of the world. I mean, it's what I've done. I've moved to another chambers for probationary tenancy. So there's again, it's nothing to kind of panic about if for whatever reason either the tenancy doesn't work out where you are, or you might want to kind of chambers might want to take a bit longer before they make a decision. I think, as long as I mean, chambers have to obviously make adjustments for you, and your particular needs and things like that. So I don't think it's really possible to fail unless you do something horrendous, which no one does in reality. And I think if there's something if you're not like meeting one of the criteria, then it's really on chambers and on your supervisor to kind of work with you to to get there and to meet that criteria, because it's them that are organizing the pupillage for you. So as long as you're willing to obviously take part and do what you're being asked to do, then there's no reason why you wouldn't pass pupillage, so to speak.
Very encouraging. It means then that we can helpfully dismiss that distinction of passing and failing people. So we're going to be super positive, and we're going to do well in our pupillage. Thanks to Emma Fielding spending her lovely Sunday afternoon to record this with us. Emma, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much for talking to our viewers today.
Oh, thanks, Nia. Yeah, it's good to be on your show, and look forward to seeing when it's out.
Wonderful. Thank you so much again, Emma. And to those of you at home or wherever you are, continue to take care of yourself, and we'll see you on another episode of Life Law Bim. Have a good one. Bye, guys. See you.